Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining the European Medical Cannabis panel of the SACS Forum. My name is Marc Lakmaaker. I'm the founder of Clearview Capital. I'll be chairing today's panel session. We were also helped in setting up this panel by Schwarz Financial Communication out of Germany, a specialized agency. We've assembled a really interesting panel today. I think you're going to find today's discussion very fascinating. We've got a number of participants throughout the value chain and also on the organizational and capital market side. The purpose of this panel is for it to be informative, to give some new angles and new information for people to make potential investment decisions, or just people who are looking to get into the space, looking to connect. I think today's discussion is going to be different from a lot of other panels that you've seen. Most panels that I've been involved with over the years were staffed by very large licensed producers out of Canada, potentially a few big MSOs out of the US. I think what we have today for you are people with very deep insights into the sector, but probably also a different angle from which they are approaching the sector. So I'm going to stop talking in half a second, and I'm going to pass the microphone over and let our panel members introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Jakob Sons. Jakob, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marc. So my name is Jakob Sons. I'm co-founder and managing director of Cansativa. I have a background in law and came to the industry with a legal background, strictly focusing on a pharmaceutical industry, regulatory and legal affairs. And Cansativa is a wholesale distribution platform, which is a GMP GDP certified entity that is focusing on building a multi-brand platform as a one-stop shop for pharmacies and other wholesalers in Germany. And I'm very delighted to engage in this panel, and I'm very much looking forward to good discussions on this panel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jakob. Florian Holzapfel, you are next, please.
Yeah, Marc, thanks a lot. Florian Holzapfel, I'm the co-founder of Cantourage. And actually, Cantourage is what we call, it's going to be the Amazon for cannabis, especially for companies which don't have a EU GMP. So everybody who wants to sell cannabis here in Germany and in Europe can come to us, even if they don't have that yet. And before we founded Cantourage, I was with Panelists. Panelists used to be the largest cannabis wholesalers here in Europe, and we sold that company in 2017 to Aurora. My background is I'm half an engineer and half an economist, and spent a long time in the solar industry, but the last 5-6 years here in the cannabis space.
Awesome, thank you, Florian. Tej from Khiron, please.
Hi, Virk from Khiron Life Sciences. I'm president and managing director of Khiron Life Sciences in Europe. We're publicly traded on the TSX Venture. Our ticker is KHRN. Khiron is a vertically integrated medical cannabis and well-being company, which has core operations in Latin America. And we have expansion markets in Europe, which is what I am helping to oversee. In terms of my background, I have a deep background in capital markets and investment banking, engineering as well. And prior to joining Khiron Life Sciences, I was a managing director at Canopy Growth Corp in Frankfurt.
Thank you very much, Tej. Sita?
Thank you, Marc, for the invitation. My name is Sita. I'm the founder of the European Medicinal Cannabis Association, together with the members of manufacturing, like Tilray, Panaxia, Material Ventures, Canafloss, and Equana. We are the voice for medicinal cannabis in Europe, and also my business in cannabis started in Germany from building it up from the scratch in 2016. And we are our intention is to harmonize legislation for medicinal cannabis throughout Europe to enable patients to access the medication.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sita. And then our last panel member is Nikolaas Faes. Nikolaas?
Yeah, hi. I'm Nick Faes, and I'm a research analyst for over 30 years doing alcoholic beverages and consumer goods. Since a couple of years, I'm doing also cannabis, both out of Canada, US, and Europe. Bryan Garnier is the prime financier of equity growth capital in Europe, and hence, of course, our interest into the cannabis space.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so now we've got the panel introduced. I wanted to introduce the first subject. If you're looking at the development of the cannabis industry, probably about 2 years ago, maybe a little longer, we saw Canadian companies move into Europe initially through Germany. As Florian just mentioned, Aurora acquired Pedanios. Pedanios had been working with a few companies. There was only one producer in Europe at the time, Bedrogan BV out of the Netherlands. There were very high expectations for the European market. Obviously, there's hundreds of million people in Europe. We saw in markets like Canada that destigmatization led to a very rapid growth of the medical patient base. We saw in medical-only states in the US as well that the number of card carriers increased very rapidly. Those expectations were kind of juxtaposed on Europe, but we haven't really seen that level of growth. So the first subject that I really wanted to go over, what do the panelists see as the reasons or sort of the differences between the European and the North American markets, and what have been the barriers for growth? And I wanted to start with Florian, please.
Thanks, Marc. So I think it's really two things. On the one side, it's really expectation and what really happened. So I agree that I think expectations have been too high for Europe with regard to some things. And I think it is relatively good to explain why expectations have been too high and what happened. So for me, it's actually three things. The one thing is that people tended to expect that the growth which have been in US and in Canada also happened over 10 years automatically would be coming to Europe only within a few years or a month even. My feeling is that within the medicinal space, it's just taking relatively similar time to grow the market. In addition to that, I think the second thing is that you have to see that the medicinal system in Europe, especially in Germany, differs from the one in Canada and in the US. And also the medicinal cannabis, how it was installed in the medicinal systems are totally different. So in Canada, there was an independent act defined, but in Germany, it really was put into the covered medicinal system. So most of the medicinal cannabis actually is covered today by the healthcare insurance companies. So it's really different from that angle. And the last thing is, I think, is that especially in the last years in Canada and also in the US, there was the clear barrier between medicinal cannabis and recreational cannabis started to go away. And also there was an expectation that the growth would be in Europe similar to the one in US and in Canada. And some people forgot that, some growth of the medicinal side was also driven by recreational use, most probably. What I think we don't see in the same way here in Europe. So I think if you put all these things together, it's quite clear what's happening. And and I think some people didn't expect it, but to be very honest, it was not something which now really surprised me what we see these days here. And I still think that the growth is immense. We still have growth rates here which are very high, and we will have that in the future if additional countries are coming online with medicinal cannabis.
So Tej, obviously one of the reasons Khiron is in Europe is because of the great potential that the market has. What barriers have you seen that have limited market demand, or similar to what Florian is saying, is just, we're on a different stretch of the market development curve, and this growth will come. So do you see barriers that have made it more difficult for Khiron to enter, or do you actually see opportunities that are enabling Khiron to leverage its asset base into Europe?
Sure. So I think I would definitely agree with some of the points from Florian. I think we're on a longer stretch where we're in the sort of earlier innings of the development of the European market. It is a different market in that it is a pharmaceutical and well-regulated market. So we have to contend with standards like EU GMP, and where you look for where primarily the supply is coming from. I understand Netherlands is a supplier to markets like Germany, but in Canada, you don't need EU GMP to sell domestically. So it's a standard that took time to settle in, to maintain. The Canadian market, where you have an asset base there, it's also seeing competing demands on it for a recreational market. You have to start wondering how capacity utilization is allocated in places like Canada. Do you supply the domestic market, which maybe capital markets reward much more? Do you send to patients on the other side of the world? So that's maybe more from a supply perspective. On demand, I think that's a great question. So this, I think, really focuses around education and getting the healthcare professionals on side. So there's been lots of great educational pushes by LPs, and I think that's something that we specialize in. We've trained approximately 1,000 doctors in Latin America. We partnered with a leading university, the University of Tec Monterrey in Mexico. And so we're trying to take this sort of approach and bring it to Europe. We're bringing it to the United Kingdom. We're also bringing it to Germany, where we're tapping our global KOL network to really help healthcare professionals, so the prescribing specialists and the doctors, understand how to prescribe in the first place. There's still very nascent activity when it comes to prescribing. People don't know the kind of familiarity with dosing. They don't know how to deal with inhalation as a vector. I mean, these are still new things to doctors. While we've had a few years of experience, there's still a lot that they can learn from the experiences of doctors in Canada, doctors in the United States, and doctors in Latin America. So I think that's an important gap to bridge, and especially so in an area of pharmaceuticals where you don't have many approved drugs. And so you really do depend on clinical research, you depend on research papers, and that sort of one-to-one interaction with doctors is important to foster that. So patients really get the best care.
Wonderful, thank you very much. I want to link to that and pass it on to Sita. Sita, when we were talking about this beforehand, you pointed out a number of differences between the North American and the European markets as well, and very much in line with what Tesh is just saying, sort of the lack of education, but also the lack of FDA or otherwise approved drugs. So maybe you can give us a little bit more insight there. What do you think should happen for the European medicinal cannabis market to accelerate its growth?
Yeah, I think I would also like to follow, of course, the talks of Touch and of Florian. The point is that I think we made an amazing step in Europe, and I think you see it from two sides. One, from the entrepreneurial side, because it's amazing that products are entering the market in a pharmaceutical market without the investment of 600 million to 1 billion of development, 12 years research, clinical trials, etc. And you are entering the market and you get even Germany reimbursement. And if after more than slightly 1 year, we have more than 200,000 prescriptions, I think this is an amazing step considering the very limited promotion power which you are allowed to do in this pharmaceutical setting. So I think two things are definitely important. Is you have to know your decision makers, which are in the pharmaceutical world, the practitioner and the pharmacist, and you have to follow this route to open it to the patient. So you are going through a road to the patient and not directly, which also saves you an amazing amount of marketing money, because you are not you don't have to promote it through broad channels, etc. And always consider that the patient is a very loyal patient. So if you have a prescription and the person is doing well with it, it remains. So you are looking at Europe not only as a market similar to the US, but you're looking to a full spectrum other market in a social health insurance with reimbursement, etc. So this is what we are standing for, is to establish a way where patients get access in a reimbursed system so that we do not have any access to black markets and can supply to patients a very safe and high quality products. If you manage with that, I think this is fine. The barriers were certainly when you enter Germany that it was based on this assessment that it is a pharmaceutical, that minimum GMP standards are necessary. And in best case, GMP1, because it's a pharmaceutical and not an active ingredient. So if this were for sure a time-consuming situation where of course companies had to deal with and to come along, but everybody with whom I was involved, they managed it and very well, and established a real nice and significant business. And this is still without an access of the rest of Europe, because we are presently talking mainly about Germany. But other European countries are looking very closely at this model and following it, how it will develop, and in order maybe to accept, and I have provided several governments with the legislation of Germany and how to improve it, and even maybe to make it better as it is even in Germany. So I think from the market perspective and from the entrance, if you would like to invest in a pharma company, on a pharmaceutical business, you have had a very good opportunity with a much minor investment and opening for yourself a market, not only Germany, but as soon as you are GMP certified, then you are opening it to a market of more than 700 million people, and in most cases reimbursed with a reimbursement possibility. So I think it's an excellent opportunity for cannabis companies entering the European market, also because it is, I think, one of the most disruptive changes we ever have seen in the pharmaceutical business. So the chances are there and are really exciting.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you very much. I wanted to link to a few things that both Sita and Tej said. It's very much about education and connections through the supply channel. So Jakob, as your organization is tasked with distributing the domestically produced capacity in Germany to the German pharmaceuticals. In your dealings with the pharmacies, do you identify or have you identified a great need for education? Is that something that you guys are helping with? And what are you seeing as the barriers for take up in your sort of segment of the value chain?
Maybe I start with the overall barriers that I would identify, and then come to the detailed question of what education is about when it comes to pharmacies. So I think the other panelists had a very, very clear view, and there's nothing really to add. We are seeing problems around expectations of an industry, timelines, regulatory barriers, a lack of education, a lack of evidence in this field, which then leads us to problems in marketing a product, because there's no really claim that you can place to a product. So other than for a product that holds a marketing authorization, there's no claim, at least for the sector that is relating to cannabis flowers and extracts that are prepared in the pharmacy. So this is hard to address the healthcare professionals, because they usually expect that you present some kind of evidence. So this is a field which is very important and brings up a clear barrier, at least for practitioners that in the beginning have some constraints relating to cannabis as a herbal medicine, as something that is new, which is always problematic in Germany at least. So we see that to really tear down those barriers, education is key, evidence is key, and this brings me to the first question that you had. What is it about in the everyday business? So we see with the pharmacies as our key points of contact to healthcare professionals, that usually the market for flowers is very much patient driven. So the initial idea of trying flowers is often something that is proposed by the patient towards the practitioner. And usually you have for the general practitioners that are not focusing on herbal medicine or on pain or have significant experience with cannabis, they usually accept to give it a try. But usually we observe that there are many questions that the patient is left with that he only can ask the pharmacist. And therefore we often receive questions around what products are comparable. So if a specific product is not available, can it be substituted? What is the difference between product A that, for example, has 20% THC and product B that has 20% THC? And it's always hard to make understandable that the lawmaker and the system provides for a clear differentiation between strains, which is not limited to THC and CBD as the main characterizing cannabinoids. This is something that a pharmacist, because he studied pharmacy, can easily understand, but it's not that easy to bring this down to the practitioner, because it is still problematic that some of the products are not available every day. This is a situation that gets better. So it's very hard to educate people on a specific product if you don't manage to have a ongoing and continuous supply and tear down the barrier that the practitioner and the pharmacist always fears that a product that the patient is used to and that is prescribed is not available in a pharmacy. So this is a bit of something that now changes. We see that new products come onto the market. We have a bit of the contradictory trend that we now see that specific strains, which are genetically identical, come on the market as white label products in certain different brands. Which will, in my opinion, lead to certainly a kind of confusion on the market, especially if the brands that are out there are not clearly focusing on doctors' education, because then they are somehow left alone with new products that seem to be identical because they're coming from the same facility. It is the same strain, the same genetic. Some of them are irradiated, some of them are not. But this is very hard to present a cohesive and understandable framework of what is available and how to use the product. And this brings us back to the problem. If you don't have evidence, it's impossible to have a claim for certain indications as it is for the finished goods.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to get back to products and the proliferation of form factors in a bit, but Nikolaas, maybe you can take yourself off mute. I would like to ask you, you've been following the industry very closely for the last 2 years, very intensely. We've had lots of chats over the last few years. When you are looking at the European market as an investment proposition, what are the barriers and the risks that you have seen, and what do you see is happening in the market right now that might help to overcome that?
Well, I would guess that first of all, it's a very tiny market. If you look at this year, maybe you get like 160, 170 million of euros of revenue, which is about 2-3% of what the medicinal cannabis market in the US will be this year. Truleaf or GW Pharma, two medicinal pharmaceutical companies, will be doing this year their revenues of $500 million US. The European medicinal cannabis market will be only maybe 300 million. So it's tiny compared to the sizes that we are looking at in the US. And in that tiny market, there are a lot of players who all pretend to be the number one and the groundbreaking player. Which reminds me a little bit about the Canadian cannabis market. When that started, there was a lot of bolstering about what their size and image was going to be. So I think that's a little bit the problem these days in the European market, is that there's too much of talk and less companies who are actually delivering revenues compared to, for example, a US market where you have seen great brand building and great revenue and great profits as well from some of the players.
So thank you for that. But there's some very fundamental differences, and Florian, maybe you can sort of talk a bit more to this. So to what extent are the European regulations, have they played a role in the slower development of the market, and to what extent do we see the need for change in European regulations? Or, I can open this up to anyone, but because I think regulation is something. Oh, sorry, Florian.
Maybe I can take a question answered in a different way. So first of all, I really don't think that we've seen a slow development in the market. As I said earlier, I think maybe some expectations have been even higher than what we've seen, but I still think that the current development is fast, and actually, especially for the companies which are entering the market, it's extremely fast and attractive. And I hope that I have the numbers right in my head. Just to give an example, looking at the quarterly numbers from Aurora, I think they have the turnover overall, roughly 10% comes from Europe. The net profit is around 25 or 20 to 25% comes from Europe. So you see that, extremely attractive. I think the expectations on the Canadian market have been much, much higher than, especially on the recreational part than what we've seen here. So I think companies entering the European market can make quite a nice business here. There are only few which have entered it for the reasons we've heard before, EU GmbH and stuff like that. But as I said, companies which are entering have an extremely nice market and also relatively high prices. So if you take a look at the prices, we are talking maybe still about a price level which is double of the one or even higher than the one in Canada. So I think it's very attractive and it's growing. If you take a look at areas like Poland at the moment, which is quite nicely growing, but also other countries, we still see that growth. Coming back to your question, trying to answer that, to what regard does the regulation play a role here? I think expectations have been that when medicinal cannabis is going to be legalized here in Germany or in other countries, that this means that various applications which are used in other countries for recreational use would be legalized, and that did not happen, and most probably also not going to happen. And from that, I think, some people expected that there would be, and maybe I'm a little bit blunt here, but that more a shift from the black recreational market would go into the medicinal market. And I think that is not going to happen for good reason, and it should not happen. And for that reason, what we see here is that we are building up a real and a truth and a continued good medicinal market in Germany, but also in other countries, which is, in my opinion, not only strong in growth, but also strong in the price level, which is in the end, I think, extremely nice for everybody.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I kind of want to move on a little bit because our time today is somewhat limited. So I would also like the panel members to keep answers to below a minute, please. A number of really interesting points have been brought up, and one that's been brought up multiple times is the ability to build brands, the ability or the limited ability to do marketing. I wanted to add one sort of another component there, and Jakob sort of hinted at there's more products coming on the market, and I wanted to turn to Tesh first on this one. Khiron has got a line of CBD products. If you're looking at the Canadian medical system, probably about half of sales, throughout the first few years were actually CBD related products. Now, CBD is subject to very different regulations in Europe. I know that Khiron has got a number of CBD-based products that it's bringing into the market right now. So Tej, maybe you can talk a bit to the position of CBD in the European market and what opportunities you are seeing for a company like Khiron to access the European market with CBD-based products.
Sure. So CBD is I think it's becoming a more controversial subject in Europe. If we maybe divide it into two categories, there's the food supplements and then say topicals. The food supplement version of CBD would be governed by regulations like novel foods, and that's within the EU. And now with the UK and Brexit, they're sort of adopting a quasi-novel foods approach, let's just say. These are very rigorous standards to meet in order to bring products to the market in the European Union, and it involves many safety tests, many hoops to jump through, and we're talking about years of collecting data before introducing a product with CBD in it. So that's on the food supplement side. On the topical side, I'd say there's a bit more straightforward regulations in terms of what you can bring to the market. That happens to be where Khiron focuses. We have a global CBD beauty cosmetic called Quida. This is something that we have been selling for years in Colombia. We've brought it to the United States and most recently the United Kingdom and Spain. And so in doing so, we've followed all of the regulations that are needed to be followed around CBD. We're being careful on what claims that we can make. And that's really the opportunity for us. I would say the most recent sort of, I think, concerns about maybe CBD being classified as a narcotic has probably made the future a little bit more checkered for food supplements. But in terms of topicals, I think we're still pretty optimistic there.
Okay, thank you. Sita, would you have something to add to that about the European landscape and the differences between CBD as a market and THC as a market?
Yeah, I think the situation is again with hurdles and chances, but even if it would be considered as a narcotic for obviously we are missing the pharmacological argumentation for that. But even if that would come to the place, then you have, of course, a narcotic reimbursed definitely in Germany. So which means that you are entering also a pharmaceutical market on a reimbursed status. So this can be also a chance with good quality products to open yourself a pharmaceutical company in that way. I think the benefits of CBD are clear there. I think what we are missing is presently the situation, which is very unregulated, and there are several publications where not serious companies are not labeling properly, etc. I think if this is something what we can overcome, then for sure the market will be very trustworthy, and if companies like Khiron would be here in front of, then I think this will be good argumentation for that. So as soon as it is a medicinal product, for sure, I think we were very interested in that. In the food supplement area, I think it is always also, unfortunately, a political decision and a long way to go with the novel food regulation. So this is something what we are waiting for, how this will develop. But I think also here, I think entrepreneurs can take their way in a very good way. Yeah.
Nikolaas, maybe you can add something. I mean, if we're looking at the European market from an investment perspective, and we're looking at the various opportunities that we have. I mean, globally, many people agree that CBD, for instance, is a large market, but as an investment class, it's very fragmented. THC as an investment class, both medicinally and recreationally, is going very strong in North America. Where do you see the opportunities in Europe, and what is needed for companies to really make an impact in either of these sectors in terms of, brands and distribution?
Well, it is, and it will remain a very diverse market. And I'm not 100% sure that the question is about CBD. I believe in the end, the question is about THC. The question is about getting high or not getting high. And all the discussion about the medicinal applications of CBD might be nice, and might be a good starter, but that's not where the big money is. And you see that in the US. In the US, currently the medicinal cannabis market is about half of the market, and 9 billion out of 16, 17 billion. In 10 years' time, the medicinal market will be like 12 billion out of 90 billion, right? So the growth will be in the recreational use of cannabis. So the discussion is about what can happen around the cannabis market, that it turns from a medicinal market into a recreational adult use market. So after all, cannabis, yes, has extremely beneficial impact on the well-being of individuals. On top of that, it is a recreational aspect that is far less harmful to human beings than, for example, alcohol is. Right? So it is about those two aspects, and how do we educate consumers and investors moving from one to another. And I think what characterized the US market, and why in the US cannabis has been so successful and why it is not so in Europe, is that the medicinal and the recreational use has been gone through mostly by ballots. What does that mean? Ballots in Europe means referendums. Referendums means discussions. And in Europe, we don't have any discussion at all about the medicinal or recreational use of cannabis. So maybe that is something that needs to happen in terms of the policy makers, that we should have one way or another have a proper discussion about the cannabis use. Now, on what concerns then the investment in that sector, there are different ways to go about. First of all, there's a lot of private equity initiatives going about, and I suppose that's going to end up like most Canadians, that will end up in failure. Next to that, you have a couple of funds like Oscar or Crystal Capital, who are doing a bundling of private equity deals, and that could be extremely useful. But you have also a couple of US/Canadian names who are active in the European space, with the background of the knowledge of the US and Canadian market. Khiron, who is here on the panel, is one example of that. But there are others. There's like Flower. There's Afria amongst the bigger names, or there's Alifia. So there are a couple of ways to play the European cannabis space through those bigger US Canadian names. Because I want to come back to what I said initially, that the European market is a very tiny cannabis market. It is the legal cannabis market this year might be ending up of 200-300 million. In the US, the legal cannabis market is going to be 16-17 billion, and half of that will be medicinal cannabis. Companies like Trueleaf or GW Pharma, who will be doing this year in medicinal or pharmaceutical cannabis, 500 million of sales, which is a multiple of what the European medicinal cannabis market will be this year. So it's an interesting market. It will be a great growth market. But as an investor, I'm not 100% sure that just purely betting on a single European player might be the best way to go about.
I think that's the difference. I mean, to me, the fact that the European market is relatively small right now shows that there's incredible upside. But you made some very interesting comments there that I just want to turn to the others in the panel, see if someone would like to respond to what Nikolaas just said.
Actually, I might follow on that. And I think all very fair comments. It's an early stage market, and I think it can be tough being an investor focused on a European pure play. I think that's where you have to be probably more broader minded. And look, I mean, from Khiron's perspective, we're not in Canada and the United States. We're in Latin America and Europe, so we're very much a sort of an ex-North America play, and we're a leader in LATAM. And just our approach to Europe, I want to be clear on this, and this is where we're very focused on cost of capital, investor returns, and how much leverage you have to the growth. So we're taking an asset light approach when it comes to Europe. This is very different from any of the other LPs. We are working with external partners, both on the supply side and distributors, so wholesalers and such on the distribution side. In Germany, we're working with Nimbus Health, for example. And as a pharmaceutical company, this lets us leverage our best assets, which is our IP and our product knowledge and our brand. And that is what we are bringing. And we think if you look at that, the returns in terms of the speed of the returns are much faster. We don't have to deal with different parts of the value chain. And I think that should probably please investors when they're looking for kind of costs to be managed and seeing that upside as the market grows. So it's a nice upside leverage.
Cool. Jakob, do you have something to add to that from your perspective?
Yeah, maybe just very briefly. I understand that Nikolaas is having has a view on the market as what is the biggest market opportunity, and this clearly might be if a European was to be or will be a recreational market. However, as we are focusing on a medical system, I think let's focus on what can be done in this market and in the addressable market. And I think there are many steps that we could take. It is about creating a harmonized system in Europe. It is about pushing the lawmakers and the policymakers towards a real-world evidence-based system. There are means on the German level, the federal level, for example, to establish standard monographs and standard authorizations for products. It is hard to apply this to cannabis as a narcotic substance without any changes, but it would be an option to discuss those activities. There is the HMPC on level of the European Union, which is a major knowledge taker when it comes to herbal medicine, and I think it's time to try and to define a system where we can improve what is currently available. Because if we went too early to a recreational market, we would clearly lose the track on evidence and the aim that we want to improve therapy. Because then I think all the money would go to the recreational market, betting on the biggest return on investment, and we observe that it's hard to build a global organization focusing on cannabis as such that is only addressing a medical market in Germany or in Europe. And that's why I think following initiatives that are locally based or that are limiting itself on the pharmaceutical market, it's very important to have a clear vision and a clear strategy on how to tackle the market. And we as Cansativa, for example, are clearly focusing on how to improve the system, how to foster market growth in the medical system. And we see it is a great bet if you're focusing on recreational, and it's a huge bet if you invest in a medical system with the vision that this might go recreational over the next 10 or 20 years. And I think this is something that investors definitely should think about when identifying their targets.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting things we have seen is that, a number of companies is engaged in scientific research in the sector. GW Pharma obviously is a very notable, both an exception and an example. But there's other companies that are working on clinical trials. To some extent, these are marketing tools rather than, having a targeted goal of developing an FDA-approved medication. But Florian, you and I over the years have had many conversations about, if the recreational market is going to be introduced in Europe. We see that the rec market in other jurisdictions is actually funding the scientific research. Do you see a momentum towards recreational use in Europe? And B, would that enable or actually, distract from scientific breakthroughs such as Jakob just mentions that would be needed to give the medical market in Europe that little push?
So, Mark, I think there's been two questions you're answering. The second question, I'm honest, I haven't thought a lot about whether the recreational market's going to fund the medicinal, or whether it would be bad if the recreational market comes to pass and then, everybody would focus on that. I can't really give you a good answer because I haven't thought in detail about it. But I think the first question, I can answer very clearly to you. I think the nice thing is that with Germany entering the path for medicinal cannabis, I'm totally convinced that the route is only going into one direction. And the reason for that is relatively simple. We have been prohibited cannabis here for a long period of time, but we started over years now to accept cannabis within Germany, and the police started to be more and more relaxed on a lot of the recreational use. With the introduction of the medicinal cannabis, there are now 1,000 of patients in Germany which are allowed to have cannabis. Now it's getting more and more difficult, to prohibit the recreational use, because, more people are saying, yeah, but by the way, I'm allowed to use it. So, and you see the discussion that also police is now saying that doesn't make any sense. I can't go around in the evening and, and talk and differentiate between, is it a medicinal use or is it a recreational use? That doesn't make any sense. So it's very clear that now people say, okay, it doesn't make any sense to just prohibit it. And the logical consequence out of that is, if you can't follow up, or if you can't prohibit it, then the logical consequence is that you have to allow recreational use at one point of time, in whatever kind and whatever form. And you see this very, very much at the moment in the political space in Germany. And basically, I think there's only one party left in Germany, or rather, it's two parties which are at this point of time against moving into the direction of legalizing cannabis. This is the CDU from Mrs. Merkel, and then it's the AfD, the more conservative angle. These are the only two parties which are against the legalizing recreational cannabis. All the other parties are basically either in favor or a little bit more neutral. But I think this is moving very clearly into one direction. And we will see that. It will be, sooner or later. Nobody can tell you exactly what the time frame is going to be. And I think with Germany going into this direction, you also will see other European countries moving more and more. First medicinal, but once with the medicinal, also with regard to recreation. So I'm totally convinced we only see it into one direction.
I mean, we've seen it in the Netherlands, where there is a pilot program being set up where the coffee shops that to this date have no legal source of cannabis are actually going to be part of a pilot project where they're going to be supplied by legal domestic producers. Germany is producing medically, currently only for medical, domestically. So we're seeing more domestic production coming up. We've seen it in Portugal, we've seen it in other countries. Sita, you obviously, as part of the European Medical Cannabis Association, do you see a growth in the number of companies that are being established locally, or is it still very much international companies that are establishing a footprint in Europe?
Yeah, I think both. We see both. We see international companies entering. We see national companies who are establishing. Of course, with the national companies, they are most in partnership because we are missing this kind of know-how what other countries had already the opportunity to grow and to make their experience to create knowledge around this pretty difficult growing part. On high quality products. I think this is something what we are still missing, but we are eager to catch up. So we are, of course, looking at this international national partnerships. But I think also to answer it in the way, how to establish this companies is also a part of entrepreneurship. And we see that it is not only about investment money back and forward, but also we see that the owners have a very big vision on what they are doing. It's not only just to purchase and sell. If this would be the case, you are much more much more better if you purchase and sell Gucci shoes. This is a very quick turnover and no losses. But this is something not what they want. And if they have the vision of their company also to establish a company which is helping patients in very, very serious conditions, and if you meet this kind of patients, it is really life-changing. And this is what we see. And also as an entrepreneur, I can say to you and to Nikolaas, not one system worked ever if you go on copy and paste. You look at, I don't know, you look in India and you establish the same company in Germany, and you look to the US and try to establish it in the same way in Europe. I think this is not the case, because entrepreneurship means so much about visions and about ideas and about about IP protection, about how to improve your product, how to work in a very, very creative way to present what you have, and with a will what you can do with it. And this is something which is the driving a success of a company. And if you would always just relate on this purpose, okay, I look in the US and then I don't find it. So why all the pharmaceutical companies who make fantastic turnovers in US are then moving towards Europe, are moving towards LATAM, are moving to Asia? Then it would not make sense. But I think the cake is built of several pieces, and one can be US, and another one can be Europe, and another one can be Asia and LATAM as well. And I think this is making and driving successful companies.
Okay, thank you.
So
okay.
For this we need and for Europe, we definitely need a harmonized guidelines which gives a good planning reality also to entrepreneurs, but also to prescribers and patients to take this route and to pick it up and to drive forward.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's amazing how fast time goes. We're getting towards the end, and I do know that there's the opportunity for Q&A, and I had a couple of very interesting questions here. The way I want to handle this, we've got some questions from the audience, and then before we leave, I would like to give each of the speakers another 20 seconds each for sort of a final, summary statement on where they think they as a company and organization are and where potentially the market is going. So the first question is, which cites from Dr. Marcus Rudolf Goetz, which scientific evidence is available for the efficacy and safety of cannabis? According to my knowledge, there is no marketing authorization available based on the evaluation of efficacy and safety for any health indication. Actually, we talked about one company that has it. So who would like to speak to this?
Just I can give my 30 seconds. So there definitely is an authorized drug that has safety and clinical trials backing it. That's GW Pharma's Epidiolex. And then to a lesser degree, you have Sativex. So I would suggest going onto their website, public information, and seeing the case there. As just sort of more general comment on the safety of cannabis, there's plenty of clinical research which underpins the safety, toxicology, and potency around cannabis. And just as one reference, you can look at the Canadian government's website, where in Canada they have legalized both adult use and medical use of cannabis. So lots of literature out there.
I might add something to that. I was actually working with a clinical research organization that was looking into just that, and they're looking to set up a number of actually COVID-related investigations, but they were able to, develop a protocol immediately for phase 2 as safety has been abundantly proven also through the Epidiolex trials that Tej just commented on. I think, Nikolaas, you want to say something?
Yeah, absolutely, because that's a very close subject to my heart. I only started coverage of cannabis 3 years ago, and I'm an alcoholic beverages specialist. And 3 years ago, I started looking at cannabis overall. And I started reading the 2016 United Nations document about cannabis. One of the first paragraphs was about how there was no death recorded from cannabis in 2015. So like no death, and kind of putting away all the fears that one had that cannabis could be a drug which impairs people and kind of leads to any accidents, compared to alcohol, compared to water, compared to coffee, compared to opioids. Cannabis was the only one actually who had no deaths recorded. So in terms of safety, I would definitely say that it is a safe subject to deal with.
Yeah. We don't have a lot of time left, so I'm going to go immediately to the next question, also actually from Dr. Guts. Which scientific evidence is, sorry, no, that's the wrong one. Why should the pharmaceutical industry use cannabis as a plant material, as the active ingredients are available in synthetic pharmaceutical grades in purified and scalable form? That's quite an interesting question.
The sort of synthetic and natural debate rages on. There's some companies that specifically focus on isolates and synthetics, like dronabinol is a well-known example for THC. But I think this is one of those things where we need to see a lot more information with regards to full spectrum cannabis extracts and whole flower therapies. So remember, there's over 100 APIs in the flower. It's not just THC and CBD, but you have CBN, CBG, etc. So there's a lot out there that we still don't fully understand the interactions of. More studies need to be done, like Project 2021 that we're a part of, to study the efficacy around these different APIs in different indications. But that's why you can't just isolate it into one synthetic.
Okay. I think that pretty much brings us to the end of today's panel, because we're out of time. I would love to talk for hours more, because this is all very fascinating. Let's see if we've got 1 more minute for some last comments. Jakob, starting with you.
Yeah, so to draw a conclusion of this discussion, I think there's much to do on evidence, on harmonization of regulatory systems, on taking it professional. And me personally, and we as a company, we are very much focusing on exactly this, assisting in creating evidence, real-world evidence, which is collected directly at the patient, and bringing in knowledge, understanding of how the product is used. And hopefully this will bring a benefit for research and for the development of a system that is, in the end, better for the patient and not only for the investors.
Okay, thank you. Florian, have you got a few seconds to add?
I mean, when I hear what we are talking about, and for me, the summary really is, I'm still in the right industry, and the reason I came here 5 years ago, I think it's still true. We are at the beginning, and we can do a lot of good things for mankind if we continue to work here.
Awesome, thank you. Tej?
Yeah, Khiron is proud to be participating in the European market, leveraging our expertise in Latin America and helping to grow this market. So UK and Germany are our first ports of call, but watch for others later.
Okay, thank you. Sita?
Yeah, I think I would like to add that at the end, the history of cannabis is written now, and I'm very happy to be part of it. And I ask everybody to join, to prepare the soil for it. And I'm sure in 10 years, we will look back and we will have a great time together.
Excellent. And Nikolaas, you?
Well, it's a great subject to be part of. It's great opportunities both in Europe and worldwide. There are a lot of cowboys on the, as an investor, I have to warn, there's a lot of cowboys on the scene, and there's a lot of mishandling of investors going on. Probably the safest bet is to stick with some of the public quoted companies, but also there, I must admit that there's a lot of greed going on. So it is an extremely interesting industry. Unfortunately, it's attracting a lot of the wrong type of investors. So I would warn potential investors in this industry for that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the panels very much for the contributions. Final comment from me: it is a fascinating space. It is a space with tremendous potential. We've heard from a wide variety of people active in the industry throughout various elements of the value chain. What Nikolaas says, he's got a strong point there. There are a lot of cowboys out there, but there's also a lot of very good companies out there. A lot of very good work is being done, be it on the science side, be it on the product development side, be it in terms of branding, distribution, importation. I hope that you enjoyed today's session. There's obviously lots more to talk about. You can, reach any of us probably through the Sachs Forum organizers. If you would have any further questions, there's always ways to get in touch with any of the members of this panel. We're all in the public domain. I thank you very much, and I hope this was enlightening for you and as enjoyable for you as it was for me to participate in. And thank you very much. This was the end of today's panel.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.